Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Debate. I'm Let's Farm and these are my co-hosts Sparrow and Sweet Pea, and we will be your moderators for this debate. Our topic tonight is military support for Ukraine is good for Ukraine and world security, and this promises to be an excellent debate. We have Void arguing that supporting Ukraine is a good decision, and on the other side we have Kaisersultan bringing up the opposition. We will be having up to a 10-minute opening per side, 45 minutes open dialogue, and a short closing statement followed by audience questions. Remember to tag the moderators or let's debate with your questions for our debaters. Please remember to hit that thumbs up if you like the show and don't forget to subscribe for more great content. Little reminder to attack the argument and not the debaters or each other. Now, since you're not here to listen to me ramble on, let's get to the show. Void will be going first, and Void, the mic is all yours.
Okay, hello. My name is Dmitry. I am a citizen of Russian Federation and my wife is a citizen of Ukraine. And I'm here today to argue that it is required to continue and increase military aids to Ukraine to help it to retake back the territories, or otherwise we jeopardize the security of Europe and the rest of the world. In Europe, it took centuries of suffering, wars, and inhumane atrocities. A few seconds. Sorry. I have technical problems. Please, sorry. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. It took centuries of suffering, wars, and inhumane atrocities in Europe to develop culture built on values, institutions, politics that aims to prevent a war and to make sure countries collaborate, share resources, keep peace, and that the errors and aggression of the past is not tolerated. And it was successful enough so that a war was already believed to be long gone. But then Putin started an aggressive war in Europe. And it is obvious that if Putin is allowed to take what he wants, then the Pandora box of war will be reopened in Europe. Failing to stop Putin, sorry, I don't know. People report me that my sound is duplicated. Is that true?
I am not hearing
I
an
don't
echo.
think
Is
so.
anyone else hearing an echo?
No, you sound perfect to me, Void.
Okay. Yeah, okay, let's then ignore that. Um, yeah, so failing to stop Putin will embolden his aggression. In a fundamentally similar way, appeasement policy failed in the 20th century. And to see that, let's remind ourselves that before the full-scale invasion, Putin already annexed territories of Georgia and Ukraine. I mean, in Ukraine in 2014, long before. He forced war in the east of Ukraine. He spilled chemical warfare agent in the UK, and he did other atrocities already. I mean, even before this war. And it is very clear by now. Longer Europe and others wait, more emboldened imperialist ambitions of Putin are. We waited for so long that he already started the largest war in Europe since World War II. There is no more room left for waiting any longer. Either Europe stands up for its security or surrenders what Europe worked for the last 70 years by building peace, freedom, and prosperity. The only way to stop this insanity is to unambiguously demonstrate to Putin that nobody is allowed to destroy peace in Europe, and their aggression won't be tolerated. Uh, by the way, it is forbidden to disagree with the government in Russia. So right now I am committing a crime by just saying that. Do you really want to live in such world, or Putin should be stopped at least at some point? And he won't stop until somebody will stop him. Any success of his aggression emboldens his power and ambitions to continue with an even larger aggression. This was not recognized until the February of 22nd year. And because of that, one European country is in ruins already. There could not be any middle ground with such a mass murderer. He must be stopped by the end of this year. And uh, just to support my view, let's refresh few moments from the last year. Putin demanded in December 2021, Putin's demand in December 2021 before the war was to withdraw all NATO forces from Eastern Europe, which effectively means to the end of NATO overall. He even claimed that the war they are having right now is against the whole NATO. And so this is not limited by Ukraine. This is about supporting a country which became a victim of foreign aggression. We allowing we support them to fight for their country, lives, children, homes, and freedom. One cannot be neutral against this kind of aggression, like, for example, Belgium, Denmark, or Norway were in 1940. Uh, and one may never build peace through appeasement, as we already saw in 20th century. The only way to guarantee peace is to stand up against the aggression. Otherwise, we do the same mistake as people who wanted to negotiate with Hitler and continue appeasing him. Ukraine needs permanent long-term security to guarantee that this will never happen again. And Putin doesn't respect any agreements. The only way to guarantee the security of Ukraine is to push back. There is no other way, because Budapest agreement, Belarus memorandum, borders agreement, and other agreements were broken already. Putin just doesn't respect agreements. You cannot force peace through agreements. The sooner Putin will understand he cannot get what he wants, the sooner peace will emerge. If Putin cannot, sorry, Putin can just pull out the forces, and then the war ends. You know this phrase. And if Ukraine stop fighting, then Ukraine ends. If if Ukraine ends, then Putin only get a confirmation that the aggression really works, and he needs to continue, as we already observed with Putin during last years. Uh, I see no other choice but increase military support of Ukraine. And the good news here is that Ukraine never lost a single strategic battle since the May of 2022. And only successful retaking of territories and crushing the enemy what happened. Just imagine the first days or first weeks, Ukraine. So basically, Russian planes were attacking different objects all over Ukraine. Ukraine had no military support. They had their main weapon was Molotov cocktails and javelins. And Russia had fresh 200,000 army and fresh armored equipment and all that. Right now, Russian army is exhausted. They use equipment of like 40th years of production and things like that. And now Ukraine has support, has trained people, trained from all over the place. So I believe it will be very unwise to stop supporting Ukraine right now when the victory is so close. That's the end of my introduction. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that opening statement, Floyd. We now turn to Kaisersultan for his opening statement. Take it away, Kaisersultan. The mic is now yours.
All right. So to begin with, I just like to correct a couple of factual mistakes Void has made. The first of those would be that Ukraine is not the deadliest conflict in Europe since World War II. That would actually be the breakup of Yugoslavia and the three civil wars that followed that. So the first point would be that Ukraine is not the deadliest war in Europe since World War II. The second claim he made is that the Russian army has depleted its its resources and has depleted its equipment, and that in the beginning of the war it had better equipment and it has now lost this over the course of the war, and this is going to negatively affect Russia's war effort. This is also factually incorrect. The initial invasion was carried out through a mass mobilization of Russian troops and their backlog of inventory. So during the initial invasion, there was much footage, there was a lot of footage of older Russian tanks and older Russian equipment and undertrained Russian troops being killed and complaining, and this is partly what was blamed for the reason why Russia was unable to take Kiev. So those are the two um, statements that Void made, which I would like to correct. Moving on from that, I think it's important that we look at the actual situation on the ground rather than relying on rhetoric and good sounding positive statements. Currently, Russia occupies two-thirds of Ukraine's Black Sea coast. It has complete control over Crimea. It has practically, and when I say practically, I mean for all day-to-day and practical reasons, occupied and integrated the Donetsk region and large swathes of Russia's eastern border with Russia. So these are two areas in which Russia has succeeded, and it looks as if Russia will not be willing to give up these gains. And so that would be the situation which I say, that would be what I say is the situation on the ground. So now if we take these facts, what we see is that Ukraine is in a very difficult situation where they have to push Russia back in two fronts, so along the south and along the east. They have to destroy Russian infrastructure that has been temporarily built by the Russian forces and drive out mass mobilizations of Russian troops from these regions. This is practically impossible for Ukraine to do. My opponent is claiming that the only way for Ukraine to achieve this is with greater military support from NATO and the United States. I agree with him on this. However, I believe he is underestimating the extent to which NATO and the US would have to be involved in the conflict. In order for Ukraine to successfully push back Russian forces from its territory, it would require direct military intervention by the United States. And by this, I mean US aerial bombing campaigns, deployment of US troops on the ground, and the same from NATO allies. This threatens to escalate to a global war and should be avoided as much as possible. If the US becomes directly involved in the war and US troops enter Ukraine to fight Russian troops, the conflict no longer is a proxy war where the US is attempting to bleed Russian resources dry through a prolonged conflict. Rather, you have direct military action between the United States and Russia, and this, as we all know, will simply escalate until the threat of nuclear war becomes a real possibility. Further to this, we actually see the Russian invasion of Ukraine causing fractures within the NATO alliance. Poland, the day before yesterday, announced it will no longer be allowing Ukrainian grain to be shipped through its borders. Several other European countries, including the Netherlands, to also prevent Ukrainian grain from being shipped to their countries and onto the international market. This is due to the drop in price for local producers that the entry of Ukrainian wheat onto the market causes. Further to this, we saw Turkey being able to increase its position in NATO by denying Swedish access and inclusion in NATO. In addition to this, Turkey's control of the Bosphorus and access to the Black Sea puts it in a key position to negotiate independently with Russia and Ukraine in order to get an outcome that benefits itself. So the war has had the unintended consequence of increasing Turkey's strategic importance and their ability. These three or perhaps four main points all push or all would support the idea of achieving a peace settlement as soon as possible. However, in addition to this, there is a moral argument to be made for ending the conflict as soon as possible. The Ukrainian conflict is costing many civilian lives. We are all in agreement that the cause of this is the actions of Putin and the invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces. However, the continued killing of Ukrainian civilians is being allowed due to NATO and US insistence on prolonging the war rather than pushing for a peace settlement. So, to summarize, the Ukrainian war has driven a wedge between NATO countries. It further escalation risks the escalation into nuclear war, and further promotion of the war results in, resulting in continued Ukrainian civilian deaths. That would be my opening statement.
All right, thank you, Kaisersultan, for your opening. We'll now move into the open dialogue part of our debate, where our debaters will have up to 45 minutes to cross-examine each other. Debaters, have at it.
Uh, yeah, okay. There are a bunch of points. I want to start with small. Kaisersultan said that continue of killing Ukrainians is allowed instead of pushing for peace. I'm curious, do you think that Ukrainians should decide what is good or what is bad for them, or somebody else should decide?
The issue is that the conflict risks involving other countries. Therefore, foreign support for Ukraine should be should take into account the populations and the global effect. I'm not arguing against Ukraine fighting for its freedom. I'm arguing against foreign powers continuing to aid the military campaign as an opposed to pushing for a peace deal.
Yeah, but you said about killing Ukrainians in context of moral judgment. What I'm saying, what I want to be acknowledged is that Ukrainians are the only people who have right to do moral judgment about killing Ukrainians. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't agree with that. So, are you saying that a third party could not look at the Ukraine war and say that's immoral?
Sorry, say again, please.
I don't agree with that because it gives the impression that a third party or someone who's not Ukrainian could not say that the war is immoral.
I'm saying that the final word should be said by Ukrainians about what is good and what is bad for them.
For them,
Yes.
well, it's a moral judgment, so I think others could say it. Are you saying that you believe that the Ukrainians should be allowed to determine whether or not they themselves want to continue the war?
Uh, yes.
Okay, well, I don't think anyone is disagreeing with that. Ultimately, they have the sovereign ability to do that.
Okay, so the argument about continue of killing Ukrainians is allowed instead of pushing peace is not really an argument if Ukrainians wants to continue this war. That's correct?
No, because what I'm saying is that the issue is foreign involvement. Foreign involvement is what is causing the conflict to be allowed to be continued.
Ukrainians will continue this conflict no matter what, with support or without
I,
support.
I
That's
disagree.
just after Bucha.
I don't think. I don't think so. I think if the United States and NATO were to push and withdraw military support, that Ukraine would be forced to come to the um, peace table and to try to negate as much of the damage that they sustained as they can.
They tried to negotiate peace, but basically the
But
conditions
the
of
United
peace
States,
proposed by Putin is to just concede everything Putin wants. There is like
well,
no other peace proposed.
this is actually incorrect. The initial peace talks directly after the invasion back last year now. Uh, in that negotiation, Putin pushed. I'll put the link down. Putin pushed for recognition of Crimea and the eastern occupied regions. And if that was internationally recognized as Russian sovereign territory, he would have stopped the conflict.
No. You miss the most important point. There was so-called demilitarization and denazification, which basically means he wants to replace the government Ukraine had with something else he agrees on. So basically, he wants a puppet government in the
I
country.
understand
That was the point, like the main point, which everybody was against of.
that that was the justification he gave to the international
No, no,
audience.
no, 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 no,
However,
no, 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 no.
you're saying no, but
That was on peace agreements. It was the condition of peace. We can just open wiki and to take a look together. Peace, Russia, Ukraine, negotiations. Okay. Uh, yes, and demilitarization and denazification. It was a demand from Russia in 3rd of March.
I, I understand that. What I'm saying, right, is that this is Russia's demand. The United States and Ukraine's demand would be the complete removal of Russian troops. So they would come to the negotiating table and reach a compromise. That's what I'm pushing for. I'm not saying to acquiesce to Putin's demands. So
Uh, uh,
your argument,
what you
if
say,
if we go
what
back,
you said, Ukraine asked
the United
that.
States would hypothetically demand the only way for peace to be the complete removal of Russian troops from all occupied areas. So
As
both sides would come with their opposing views and reach a peace settlement where they could compromise. That's the point of pushing for a peace agreement.
as I already said, it was requested from Russia. Russia rejected this proposal.
And if you continue to push for the peace, they will eventually overcome it. No one's going to immediately acquiesce to whatever demands you have because the US demands for peace were not something Russia would agree to. So What I'm pushing for is for both parties to de-escalate the war and force a peace negotiation.
Again, Putin agree to peace only on conditions
Okay, this
where
was the
basically
initial
Ukraine
stages. There
surrenders.
weren't negotiations long term over which they could talk these things out. It was simply a one-time offer, and Putin rejected it.
No, no, that's not true. Again, if you open this page, which I already opened, there was five rounds before Bucha, and that was one story. After Bucha, Ukraine drastically changed their position, and there was
Exactly.
so much rounds
now
after
that
that.
now
Basically,
that
Russia rejected peace like 20 times already,
yeah,
with
during
the
the initial
conditions you
phase,
just mentioned.
during the initial phase, of course it would. It was making massive gains. Why would it push for the peace agreement when it's making massive strategic gains in the conflict? That doesn't make sense.
I'm saying what you propose doesn't work. Everybody tried.
Of course
Putin
it won't.
doesn't want that, and that's just
That
fact.
this
We
that's
can just
rhetoric.
look at this together, but that's just fact.
Okay. That's very nice emotional rhetoric. However, the fact remains that
Yes,
it
the
is
fact
a
remains.
fact of the nature of the conflict that Russia has achieved massive strategic gains, and it is now in a position where it can compromise and come to a peace agreement. You cannot compare the peace offer during the initial invasion to the situation Russia is currently in Ukraine and the situation the Ukrainian forces are in currently. The conflict has already been waging on for a year plus. The lines and the land control has been overall established, with some exceptions, for example, in the northeast, uh, along the northeastern portion of the Russian Ukrainian border. So, because the lines of control have been, in a way, de facto drawn up by the conflict zones between the free Ukraine areas and the Russian occupied areas, it's good. It's now a good time to push for peace. And factually, if you look at it, Russia has a very good incentive to de escalate because it would allow it to legitimize the areas it's occupied. And Ukraine is in a situation where it cannot push Russian forces out of the occupied territory. Therefore, it also has to come to the peace table. Factually, it would appear that the gains and the situation for both parties allow it allow it to be the case that it is how would you say it is beneficial for both of them to come to the negotiation table. That's my point.
First of all, Ukrainians won't agree on that after Bucha. They will continue war no matter what, and they will do counter-offensive in June or whatnot. Will West stop supporting Ukraine or not? That's just like that. What will happen no matter what. Secondly, you kind of ignore what I said, that Putin doesn't respect agreements. He doesn't honor them. There was
I
a
mean,
huge ton of different
with
agreements with
international
Putin, and
backing,
he always breaks them. So even
with international
there was
backing, you'll be
international
forced
backing.
to.
For example, Беловежские соглашения. Again, on all those agreements, there was international backing already. He just ignores that. He ready for any consequences West is ready to throw on them. This is
Because
like
there was
he
no.
already broke all international agreements here.
Okay, in the past, the United States and NATO had no bargaining chips in a way to push for a peace settlement. If they had pushed for if Putin had agreed to a peace settlement last year, he would not be in a beneficial position to himself. Currently, if Russia agrees to a peace settlement, it will have made strategic gains, and it will have been in a better position than it was during the start of the conflict, and therefore the conflict in its eyes would have been a strategic success. Therefore, it makes logical and rational sense for Russia to come to the peace table, and I believe they would, because it is logical, come to the peace table if the United States and NATO push for it. You cannot compare Russia's refusal to come to the negotiating table in the beginning of the war compared to now.
Uh, Again, let me repeat what I'm saying. I'm saying even if you do peace agreement with Russia and they withdraw forces from some territories or whatnot, nothing stops Russia to start over when they will prepare new army, new people, a new military alliance or whatnot, and capture the rest of Ukraine, because Putin doesn't honor international agreements at all.
Okay, this is ignoring the entire parameters and context of the conflict. Russia will occupy
The
as
opposite.
much of Ukraine as it can until the United States and NATO determine that direct military action is now required to prevent complete Russian domination of the entirety of Ukraine and push the Russian border until Moldova and Belarus, right? The entire conflict is a balance between seeing how much they can allow Russia to occupy without risking the escalation to a global war. That is the essence of the conflict. The United States, it appears, under Biden, has calculated that it can bleed Russia through a prolonged, all in a way, guerrilla war in Ukraine, which props up the United States manufacturing and military industry, props up um, the economy of the United States, and so bleeding Russia through a slow, prolonged conflict, which the United States calculates Russia will inevitably come out on top in terms of Ukrainian territory. This is beneficial to the United States and the U.S. economy. The U.S. is not doing this out of goodwill to Ukraine. If Ukraine begins to lose more and more territory, then the United States would directly intervene in order to prevent Russian occupation of the entirety of Ukraine. However, as I said before, this risks the escalation to global war. Therefore, the United States and NATO are seeing how long they can prolong the conflict without it escalating. Zelensky and the current Ukrainian government was actually brought in by the United States in 2014. This conflict has been planned for the past 9 years in order to prevent further civilian loss rather than deploying this strategy of a prolonged conflict in which Russia will gain as much as it can without the risk of escalating to global war. The United States should push for an immediate ceasefire and from there try to negotiate whatever peace deal it can achieve.
You like ignore what I say.
Your
No matter
claim
what.
Okay, your claim
Uh-huh.
is that Putin will not respect any peace deal. What I'm saying is that this is not correct because the current situation is that Russia will have to accept a peace deal if pushed in order to prevent global war and the threat of escalation into nuclear war. So Russia
Yeah,
has
but
incentive now to follow the peace negotiation and the negotiated outcome, whereas in the past he did not have an incentive to do that.
yeah, but West is too afraid for nuclear war, and Putin see that he can do whatever he wants, and West will always be afraid because they afraid of escalation. So they can, yeah, they can make peace agreement, wait, gather new army, new upgrade military equipment, make a better military alliance, and capture the rest of Ukraine. Because West will be afraid to
Okay, this
basically your arguments will be repeated again because we saw these arguments in 2014 already, and this is where we got to because of these arguments already.
the U.S. The apparent weakness of the U.S., as you put it, which I don't think is actually the case, is simply an attempt or a strategy to prevent immediate escalation on the part of the US. The US is, in a way, holding itself back in order to prevent an escalation to global war. I've already brought in other parameters, for example, the fracturing of NATO that the Ukrainian conflict has caused. The immediate escalation of this war will further fracture NATO, will risk the escalation to global war, and will, quite frankly, result in the complete destruction of Ukraine because Ukraine will simply turn into a battleground where remaining NATO and US forces fight against Russian forces.
Again, let's judge morality about lives of Ukraine by opinion of Ukrainians. Let's not judge for themselves. If they want to continue this war,
If
this is their
Ukraine,
choice.
if Ukraine
First,
wants to, if Ukraine wants to turn itself into a battleground, which is uninhabitable, in which Russian and US troops fight until there's escalation into a global war, then they have the right to say that. However, because this will involve the international
look,
community and
sorry, you
multiple
talk
countries,
very much. We kind of, so in your initial statement, you did like seven things I wanted to comment on. I tried to comment on one of them, then you create like seven inside one of them, and could you just
yes, it's
provide
important to
more
examine
laconic
every
answers?
single. We have to examine every single relevant factor, and if that requires us to break down each individual point to the nth degree, then we have to do that.
I know the details. You don't need to tell me the details. I'm observing this work very closely each day of my life since it started. You don't need to pronounce things. You just tell your view like on high level, like laconically. What is your position here? You don't need to describe me things.
I'm restating my point because you aren't accepting that what I have said is the actual reality. You're trying to combat what I say as a reality with rhetoric.
Okay, so you are saying that the only way to prevent World War III is to appease Putin with these strategic wins. What I'm saying is no, the opposite. Putin is the kind of man who, if he can get political power through aggression, he will amplify this method even more. He tried first gently, everybody ignored. Then he increased aggression, everybody ignored. Then he increased more, the 2014 happened, and he started a proxy war with Ukraine in the east. Everybody ignored. And then he understood that nobody wants to mess with the Russian nuclear power. So he started full-scale invasion into European country. And by the way, about factual wrongs you mentioned, no, in Ukraine already more people died than in Yugoslavia. And Yugoslavia was going for 10 years, while Ukraine war is going for only 1 year, and it already has more casualties. So no, the deadliest war is...
How many civilians have died in Ukraine currently?
We talk about total. I don't know. We have...
8,000.
I don't know. We talk about total. It says 200,000 casualties on Russian side,
I'm
So
talking about civilian deaths. So in Ukraine,
okay, okay. Again, there was 10 years against 1 year. Compare the rate even so.
no, but what I'm saying is that each individual conflict following the initial civil war, even if you take each of those as separate wars, the casualties within those separate wars, which were 1 or 2 years, then they stopped, then 1 or 2 years. Each of those individual wars had more casualties than the current Ukraine civilian casualties than the current Ukraine Russia conflict.
Uh, yeah, we can dive into it. Again, it was 10 years. And even if you look at absolute numbers, they're already about the same as we have in
I'm
Ukraine. For
talking about
example, amount
civilian
of
casualties.
displaced people, amount of displaced citizen people in Ukraine are more than through the whole 10 years of Yugoslavian wars. And if we compare casualties and we include military, then we see
No,
that
no, I
on
said
some
civilian.
estimations,
I clarified to say civilian
yeah,
casualties.
you said it only
Okay,
now. You haven't said
all
it
right.
in the
If you
initially.
want to
I'm just
argue
going
that,
through your points. You just said amount of some number of points initially, and I just want to go through them. Uh, so that was the first one. Practically impossible, you said. No, it's practically possible because, like the U.S. and basically Europe thought Ukraine will fall in 3 days. The year is passed, but since May, Ukraine only retaken back territories on strategic level. On tactical, yeah, they concede some small territories, but then retake them back on strategic counter-offenses. So it's practically possible. Moreover, if Ukraine will go to Melitopol, it will have access to Kerch Bridge, and then it will have a good playing card against Putin to incentivize him for a real peace, because losing Crimea for Putin, that would be a real incentive for peace, and no matter for peace no matter what. About underestimate how US and NATO needs to be involved. Ukraine doesn't ask US and NATO to be directly involved. It only asks to provide equipment and munitions. That's it. You don't need to have troops, your planes, whatnot. Only just material support. So nothing about underestimation. About direct military intervention, as I also already said, no. Ukraine already doing success since May. You just need to continue these military aids which Ukraine was having by now.
okay, Ukraine has
Peace.
not. Okay, let's
Okay.
let's stop. You said four in a row rapidly. Okay, let's go back to the second one. Ukraine cannot remove with simply a equipment from the U.S. Ukraine cannot remove Russia from it from the occupied territories. This is impossible. Ukraine does not have, first of all, enough people to do that. It does not have the resources to continue a conflict in order to push Russia out, and it does not have the air support, the long range artillery, the anti-aircraft weaponry required. It has none of these things. So it's impossible, literally, for Ukraine to, without U.S. troops on the ground, to push Russia from its occupied territories.
So then, how Ukraine kicked off Russia from outskirts of Kiev, including Bucha, from Liman, from Kharkov Oblast and all
Because
that, from
because
Kherson.
Russia has not deployed full military might like it did in Syria. If Russia wanted to, they would conduct a massive aerial bombing
That's
campaign.
just false.
What do you mean it's
That's
false?
factual false. We can go
It's actually
through
false.
sources, and Russia used
Russia would deploy the same
200,000.
Russia would deploy the same tactics it did in Syria, where it conducted a
It
massive.
tried.
It did not.
It tried.
It did not
It tried.
flatten. It did not flatten Kiev to the same degree it flattened Aleppo and Damascus And
It cannot. Can I
it kind
say?
of
I
yes,
just know this thing. I can tell you. Russia tried. First days, if you look at videos and all that, you will see a lot of planes flying here and there, bombing different buildings, different objects, and so on.
okay, but it
But
was not a
apparently,
complete.
Ukraine.
It was not a.
May I say? Stop. Wait. May I say? So, but apparently, Ukraine, in contrast to Syria, has anti-aircraft missiles, and Russia started to lose a lot of very expensive airplanes with pilots. So they had to stop because they never gained air superiority in this war.
Okay, this is not true. Russia simply did not
That's
push.
true.
Russia simply did not push to establish aerial superiority because doing so would result in direct U.S. intervention militarily. If Russia wanted to, it would flatten Kiev with extreme bombing like it did in Syria. It would do that.
In,
But
in
doing
Syria,
this,
it took months to do that.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Can you please give each other time to speak your points and not overtalk each other? It makes it really difficult for the audience to hear your points.
Okay. Uh,
Thank
so
you.
what we need
okay,
to do? Sorry.
the time frame over which Russia was able to flatten Aleppo is not necessarily that important because, as you said yourself, it was over months. This is still a relatively short time frame. If Russia wanted to, it would use heavy bombard artillery and aerial superiority to completely flatten Kiev and Ukraine and have a complete destruction of Ukraine's infrastructure. However, it's not going to do this because the United States and NATO would respond in part with direct action, and this would lead to global war. The entire dynamic I'm trying to say here is that Russia is not giving 100% military action because the threat of the United States and NATO intervening is acting as a deterrent. If Russia wanted to, it could completely flatten Ukraine, but it's not going to because the US and NATO would respond militarily and directly. That's the dynamic. What we see here going on is simply what the US and NATO has calculated it can allow the Russians to take control of without needing to escalate it. That's the entire dynamic. This and the same thing is going on the Russian part. So Russia is only in a way pushing how far it thinks it can push without the US and NATO directly intervening. This is the entire dynamic of the conflict.
Yeah, but what you say is just built on false. As I said, Russia tried to
It
bomb
did not try.
Ukraine and it
It did
failed.
not try.
Can I say? Can I say?
No, but you made a statement.
So
Kaisersultan, can you please give Vlad time to answer and please don't interrupt him? Thank you.
So what I'm saying, to bomb Aleppo, it took months, multiple months. So Russia had to pull out air force in few weeks after the war began. And the first weeks were mostly focused on bombing military objects and on civilian objects. They started to bomb civilian objects only months after the war began. So Russia tried to bomb Ukraine with everything they got. They just failed because they never got air superiority. So everything you said after that about these dynamics is built on this false. So could you just restate your statement?
Okay, you just made a contradiction because you said that Russia first focused on military and then went to civilian. This in itself,
Yes.
this statement, okay, proves that Russia did not deploy a complete and total aerial bombing campaign. Because if it had been attempting to do a complete and aerial bombing campaign, it would not have started with first military and then moving over onto civilian. It would have completely flattened all infrastructure without differentiating what it was between civilian and military.
I can agree with you only if you talk about nuclear, tactical nuclear weaponry. If you talk about conventional weaponry, then I drastically disagree. Russia doesn't have like 100,000 of bombers. No, Russia have a very big fleet, but yet it takes weeks to bomb everything because you need to gather intelligence where to bomb, how, when, where nobody will shoot you down and things like that.
Okay, I'm not saying it's going to take a day. I'm arguing that the same in Ukraine if it wanted to. Russia could do that. I'm not saying that the same in Ukraine if it wanted to.
Oh,
Right, and had to pull out air forces because they started to get enemy. I will just continue. I will just continue to talk over you if you interrupt me. Sorry. Just you talk very much, and I feel like I'm not given a place to talk. So okay, what was I saying? Again, Russia tried that, but they had to pull out air forces because they started to get too much loss.
Okay, so your claim is that Russia deployed a complete aerial bombing campaign, and at the same time, you're saying that the reason the bombing campaign did not succeed is because first they targeted military and then they uh, moved towards civilian. So saying that they distinguish between military and then civilian targets in itself is proof that it was not an attempt at a complete aerial bombing campaign. Otherwise, if it was an attempt at a complete aerial bombing campaign, they will not make this distinction and would just push for an immediate, complete leveling of all infrastructure.
Let me restate again. Russia doesn't have like 100,000 bombers. They have much less amount of bombers. And when you fly around hostile territory, you first need to disarm your hostile because otherwise you will lose all your air force. Because of that, air force of Russia was first focused on military objects, but they were unable to handle even that kind of objectives. They had not enough air power. So they had to pull off this air power.
Okay, what I'm saying is that the reason Russia did not successfully take out these military targets initially is because it did not want to carry out a complete aerial bombing campaign because that would risk direct involvement of the United States. So the current uh, aerial defense systems Ukraine has is not sufficient to shoot down the entirety of the Russian Air Force. Russia could quite effectively, as it did in Syria, level most of Ukraine's, or Kiev, for example, if you want to talk about Kiev, it could level most of Kiev and the surrounding infrastructure in a relatively short time frame, perhaps a couple of months, as it did in Aleppo. Ukraine does not have and does not possess the enough of the anti-aircraft equipment that is required to prevent that. So Russia could do that. Russia did not do that because it did not want to risk escalation and having the US directly involved. It does not want US fighter planes flying and fighting over Ukrainian skies. It does not want the United States giving Ukraine anti-aircraft missile systems and SAM systems. It does not want that. That's why it's not carrying out the campaign. It's not an inability to do so. It is a lack of willingness to do so because of the consequences.
That's just not true. First of all, Ukraine asked US and everybody to give no-fly zone exactly because there was a lot of planes bombing a lot of things all around the Ukraine. And then even when Russia started to bomb specifically civilian objects, specifically for Ukrainians to suffer, nobody intervened. US haven't intervened, Europe haven't intervened. So your argument about direct involvement because of full air force attack just doesn't stand because West is too afraid to have direct involvement. They just would like to do not escalate.
Okay, I'll just say it again then. Russia did not carry a complete heavy aerial bombing out. It did not do this. The bombing of Kiev is
I already answered
on a
on
much.
that.
Okay, but you're simply reiterating your point without addressing what I'm saying. Russia did not drop as many
I
bombs
already,
on Kiev
okay.
as it did in Aleppo. Would you agree with this? Yes or no?
As if we look at first how much time, so when planes operated, then no, I disagree. In Aleppo, they operated for years to do that job.
But
In Ukraine,
you stated
sorry?
that Aleppo was flattened within several months. That was your statement, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so trying to elongate the time frame to years is irrelevant because you conceded yourself that Russia was able to flatten Aleppo in several months. What I'm saying is
Okay,
that if,
let me take a look.
all right, yeah, let's go ahead and pull the data up then.
Okay, Aleppo. Mhm. Uh, Okay, basically, bombing in Aleppo began in early 2012, and when it ended, um,
I mean, it would have had continued strikes. What I'm trying to say is that the effective demolition of Aleppo's infrastructure, and I agree with you on this, took several months.
it looks like it ended in 2016, so it took 4 years.
And that's the continuation of the bombing campaign. What I'm saying is that the effective demolition of Aleppo's infrastructure happened in a matter of months. That's my argument, which is what you said as well. So what I'm saying is that if Russia could do that in Syria, it could do the same thing in Ukraine. It just didn't attempt to do as intense of a bombing campaign as it did in Syria. That's what I'm saying. It did not attempt the intensity
Yeah,
and the severity of it.
I already answered on that. Russia applied even higher intensity, but it had to distribute this intensity on military objects which Ukraine had and Syrian rebels haven't had, because Syrian rebels is not a regular army. And in the end, Russia felt too many losses and had to flee. And overall, they only had opportunity to bomb for like a couple of weeks. And they did bomb a lot of things during these couple of weeks, but they were scattered all across the country. They were not focused on Kiev specifically.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to say yes, I agree with you. Ukraine does have a much better anti-aircraft setup than Syrian rebels. What I'm saying is that you said that Russia was forced to focus a targeted bombing campaign on Ukrainian military sites in order to allow for the deployment of a aerial bombing campaign. Correct? In other words, Russia tried to first take out the military target so that its planes could fly freely without being shot down. That's your argument, correct?
Frankly, I feel like everybody is tired from us discussing this subject. I can continue if you want, but I think maybe we should switch to other point.
Okay, all right.
For
Let's
example, you
go
were
to the
saying
second one.
practically impossible.
Mhm.
Sorry?
Yeah. So let's
S-
go to let's talk the generality then. I think we've been down this wormhole a bit too
Okay.
long. I'll let you
Uh-huh.
go ahead. You go ahead.
What I'm saying is, even without sophisticated equipment like HIMARS or things like that, Kiev was able to resist with much larger pressure. But they had to temporarily concede very important territories. Like Then, when Russia realized it's not so easy to capture Ukraine, they had to regroup specifically on eastern Ukraine. And even then, they had to concede Kherson, Kharkov Oblast, Liman, and all that, because they cannot spread so thin their resources to hold this territory. It basically means that the forces right now is about equal. But what happened during last months, Russia very hardly tried to capture Bakhmut. They basically mid-grinded the whole mobilized bunch of armies they made in November by now. So right now, like in this May or June, the move will be for Ukraine to do counteroffensive. And from my point of view, basically this is like the final battle, basically. So either Ukraine succeed and gets Melitopol, then it gets very good incentive to force Putin for peace, or this war gets into stalemate and basically goes forever. So from my point of view, if we want to guarantee peace in Europe and in the world, we need to end this war as soon as possible. And we have no other choice but these two. We cannot concede Ukraine. Ukraine won't agree on that. There is no such choice. So if you want to have peace, you need to help to recapture Melitopol without direct troops, without direct help, just give munitions and equipment. That's it.
Okay, so what I would say is that I agree with a large portion of what you said here. The the point on which I disagree is that I think you're overestimating Ukraine's ability to retake and launch a successful counteroffensive at this stage. So, for example, you said that Russia attempted in the beginning of the war to come down south along the river and take Kiev, and that it was unable to do so, and that it was surprised it's unable to do so. I, to a large degree, agree with you on this. I say that I think Russia underestimated how much of a resistance Kiev would put up, and I think that Russia was expecting a, a quick and easy occupation of Kiev. Where I disagree is that you think or you state that it was due to Ukrainian strategic and military brilliance that Russia withdrew. What I'm saying is that Russia simply calculated that the cost of occupying Kiev was too high to justify the occupation of Kiev, and so it decided to move to other theaters in the conflict. So that's, I think, where we disagree. You're saying that the reason for Russian failure in Kiev is because of the Ukrainian resistance and all these things. What I'm saying is that that's true, but ultimately the reason Russia didn't completely flatten and destroy Kiev is because the cost to Russia of doing that would be too high to justify doing it. So we agree on the situation here. I think where we're disagreeing on is the reason why this happened.
Yeah, okay, this feels like step forward in our conversation. So here I would say Ukraine was underestimated like already maybe 5 or 6 times strategically. So
I
first
agree
of
with
all,
that. I
okay,
agree.
then I won't enumerate that. And I agree that we don't know if Ukraine will be able to recapture Melitopol. I'm saying only one thing. I'm saying that either Ukraine will capture Melitopol, and then there will be a very good way to force Putin for peace, or not, and the war will continue for a long time. And the only way to improve chances to retake Melitopol without escalating war is to provide equipment and munitions. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, so what I would say in response to that is if you are saying to supply Ukraine with equipment and strategic information and things like this in order to allow it to push for one more counteroffensive, then okay, I think I would agree with you on this. What I'm saying is that pushing for a prolonged conflict over years, where through a war of attrition, Ukraine slowly, potentially reclaims the entirety of the occupied regions, this is what I'm arguing against. I want to say that the U.S. and NATO should give Ukraine as much equipment to allow Ukraine to push for one more counteroffensive so that when it comes to the negotiating table, it is in a stronger position. Okay, yeah, I would agree with you on this. So, yeah, I think on that point,
Okay.
then we can agree. But what I would say is that the risk of this is that there's the possibility that they say, not this, we have to launch one more, one more, and then the conflict gets drawn out into a long multi-year war. So I'm trying to balance these two possibilities. But if you want to push for a, like you said, I think I'd agree with that.
About one more. I agree. There could be one more and one more. But if we will see that there is no progress, like 2 times a row, 3 times a row, then we can say it doesn't make sense to continue, because up until now, Ukraine haven't made a single failed counteroffensive. Every single counteroffensive was very successful. So it makes sense to continue while it works. When it will stop working and we will reliably see it doesn't work, then let's like consider what you say.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I
You,
guess,
I mean, what you
all
just
right.
said.
I guess I think we're coming from different perspectives then. I'm arguing with the assumption that the counteroffensives will inevitably at some point fail. So I guess I'm arguing for what will happen in the future over the next year, whereas you're arguing for what's a strategic policy that the U.S. should employ directly today. So in my mind,
I'm as a
go ahead. Go ahead.
sorry, continue.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, continue. Okay. As a Russian citizen, I just like I was against Putin regime for more than 10 years, and I kind of learned. I kind of, I don't know. I think I have some kind of understanding how it works, and from my understanding, which is very subjective, most likely wrong, and all that. I'm just saying where I coming from, since you shared where you're coming from. From my understanding, the only way to really stop Putin is to push back. There is no other way at all. He doesn't afraid to escalate at all. If he sees weakness and like desire for peace during war, he consider weakness. Then he will push further. He always do that. But when somebody gives pushback, he stops pushing further. That was a pattern for 20 years of Putin, and it was consistent. It would be weird if Putin would behave differently this time.
I mean, I, to be honest, the impression I get is that over the course of the debate, you've slightly adjusted your position. Would you say that's true?
I don't feel that way, but I'm open to your
Okay,
like.
because so initially, when we set up the debate, the impression I got of your stance is for the US and NATO to send troops and
No,
tanks
no, 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 no.
and okay, so this is the
It was
position I
never
was
the
arguing.
case.
Okay, so this is the position I was arguing against.
Sorry, I
Sure.
might have expressed myself badly somewhere. I never meant that
Okay, all right.
during the whole war
Okay, so I mean, I
anywhere.
guess it turns out we actually agree more than we disagree on the policy moving forward.
Okay.
I was arguing again because the proposition you had put forth, the way it was worded, it made it sound like you want U.S. troops and U.S. planes and NATO troops and planes to be fighting alongside Ukrainians against Russia. And that's why I kept bringing up the escalation of global war, and that's why I kept bringing that up. So I guess the
I
entire,
see.
yeah. So I think, yeah, we agree probably more than we disagree.
Well, I basically propose what Zelensky asks. He asks for specific equipment, and we just need to provide this equipment. That's basically it. In the beginning of war, he asked for a no-fly zone and all that, and this was more arguable. I have no strong stance on this. But as for equipment, I have pretty strong stance that Ukraine should be provided with. I mean, with fire jet, fighter jets, or my English is not that good, and things like that, which West doesn't provide Ukraine with yet, which is bad. By the way, apparently we have a question.
Okay, all right.
Was
So wait,
what
before
was
we
the
go to
immigration situation?
questions, okay,
Uh-huh.
so I'm gonna make a statement, and then this will be my view, and then you tell me whether or not you agree with this. So I have adjusted what I
Okay.
say to some degree. I think since we actually set up the debate last month. So my statement would be: I believe that in order to prevent further civilian death and the continuation of the war, both sides should push as soon as possible for a peace negotiation. However, Ukraine should seek to regain some strategic objectives in order to put it in a better negotiating position. This is, I think, my view. What do you think? Would you agree or disagree?
So I understand Ukrainian position is they are ready for peace negotiations if Putin is ready to pull out the forces from Ukrainian territories. I agree with this statement. If as like in the second when Putin says he agree on this condition, I think Ukraine should be encouraged to somehow gently uh, to proceed with this way. But I don't think Ukraine actually would need to be encouraged because I'm pretty sure they will do it themselves.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah, I think we're
yeah,
sort of. I think so. If you agree with the statement I made, I would agree with what you just said. With what you just said here, so I guess, yeah. I think that's kind of a resolution there. Should we move to questions?
If you guys are ready, we have a couple of
sounds
questions
great.
from the audience. All right, we now come to the close of the debate, guys.
Okay.
If you guys wanted to make any kind of short closing statement, now's the time. It's up to you.
Oh wait, I got this question for Kaiser
Uh,
by.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna read that in just a moment.
Okay, alrighty. Okay, closing. I guess I'll go first. My one's pretty short. I believe that the best policy right now is to push for a peace negotiation as soon as possible. However, I do concede that Ukraine would have to, in the next few months, achieve some strategic victory which it could use, and not even a large one, as you said, perhaps retaking certain strategic cities or areas, or inhibiting Russian advances in those regions. If Ukraine was able to do this by being given U.S. equipment, then it would be in a better position at the negotiating table. I think this is also good. So that's my closing statement, and that's my view.
Thank you, Kaisersultan. Boyd, would you like to make a closing statement real quick?
yeah, I guess not on the subject, but I just want to say, Kaiser, thank you for joining this. I asked like 10 different people who were arguing against military support for Ukraine, and nobody agreed for live debates. So I am grateful that you agreed, and I'm a bit sorry that I was a bit emotional in some moments, but I guess that's it.
That was
Thank you.
a fun conversation. Thank you for taking your time to do it.
Well, I'd like to thank you both for participating. This was a very educational and informative debate. Now we have a couple of audience questions. The first one is for Kaiser, but Void, if you would like to answer it after Kaiser, feel free. Actually, this says, why is Kaiser acting like Russia are a non-willing participant or victim in this conflict?
I mean, I don't think I ever argued that. Boy, do you think I ever said that Russia was a non-willing victim or anything? Because I never. I don't think I ever gave that impression.
Uh,
I'm not sure.
let me share one thing. I understand like different people have different experience, and sometimes it's difficult to look at yourself from different perspective. But from my perspective, the overall in the US people, there is like some very bad habit to do not consider Ukrainians as part of this conversation. Like this is a dialogue between US and Russia. It is not like Ukrainians are the main subjective force here, in my opinion. And when like some people from the US say about things like this is US government tries to ramp up military something in the US or whatnot, like in Ukraine and Russia, at least in Ukraine, nobody cares. Like there is a war between Ukraine and Russia. Whatever happens to military industry in the US, if they prosper, okay, that's good. Why not? They are needed right now. But that's not the point of the discussion. So when you mention these things like about military industry and these things, it triggers this kind of impression.
I feel you. Okay, but I mean, I'm not. I really don't know why he's saying that Russia is a non-willing participant. I don't think I ever said that. So, is this from P Barnes? God damn
Yes,
it,
it's
bro.
from P
That
Bar.
guy just don't like me, man. I swear to God. But
Said you were active.
Oh,
Okay, well, our next question comes from me actually, and this is like a precursor to the war question. What was the immigration situation between Russia and Ukraine before the conflict broke out?
Uh, well, our countries were very intertwined in terms of simple people. Like we had somewhat different culture, though in the like Western countries, people do not really differentiate us. They see like the same thing, especially before the war. Now they learned how to differentiate us. So and for example, I worked at university. Like at least I think like 20% of my colleagues at university, I mean in the department I worked on, it was like 60 people, were previously from Ukraine. And like I started to live with my wife, who is Ukrainian, in Moscow, and basically a lot of Ukrainians were traveling into Russia before the war. But now it's it's very different. Though there are two stages of this war. So like first like initial war kicked off in 2014, and a lot of Ukrainians already there decided like never travel to Russia and things like that. But like the vast majority, I don't want to speak for Ukrainians. It feels wrong when I'm Russian. Yeah, I guess I will end here.
Well, P. Barnes decided to clarify for Kaiser, saying that we should stop arming Ukraine to avoid nuclear war suggests that Russia are in some sort of threat. Russia is threatening nuclear war, and they are the belligerent.
yeah, that's. I mean, that's what my whole thing was that if the U.S. intervenes, then Russia's gonna escalate. Then America's gonna escalate. Then you have the threat of nuclear war. So I think he's trying to perhaps map it out that I'm arguing that somehow Russia's a victim here when I'm not. So I don't know what to say to that.
Well, that looks like the end of our audience questions. I'd like to thank you all for coming today and hope that you enjoyed our show. If the participants have links, I will add them to the description. And if you like their performance here, please consider checking out their stuff. Remember to hit that like button if you like the show. Also consider subscribing to our channel and hitting that bell to make sure that you do not miss any of our exciting content coming up. Thanks again for coming. Remember, let's not fight. Let's debate the topics and let's talk about the issues. Again, thank you, P Bar or Kaiser P Bar. Thank you, Kaisersultan and Void, for this debate.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.
Take care, guys.
All right, one last little note from me. Thanks to all of our viewers. Remember to hit that subscribe button and like if you like the show today. And we will catch you all on the next Let's Debate.